Have you ever wondered why $1 doesn't equal 1 yen or 1 euro? It might seem straightforward, but currency values are anything but simple. They fluctuate constantly, influencing everything from the cost of your vacation to major financial decisions made by investors. So, why don't we have a single global currency that's equal across the world? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why these currency differences exist, how they impact your daily life, and whether a future with one universal currency is even possible. Now that you're hooked, let's dive in. We're going to break down this complex topic into easy-to-understand parts so that by the end, you'll be able to answer the question, why isn't $1 equal to 1 yen or 1 euro? The first thing to understand is that currency isn't just paper or digital numbers. It represents the strength and health of a country's entire economy. In fact, currency is like the heartbeat of a nation's financial system. When we compare currencies like the US dollar, Japanese yen, or the euro, what we're really doing is comparing the economic power behind each of these countries or regions. Example, let's think of the US dollar. The US has the world's largest economy, backed by massive industries, innovation, and international trade. That's why the dollar is so strong globally, because so many people, companies, and countries need it for trade, investment, and reserves. On the other hand, countries like Japan have different economic situations. Japan's economy is powerful but relies heavily on exports like technology and automobiles. The yen, as a result, tends to be weaker compared to the dollar because Japan's economy is smaller and more dependent on global trade. When Japan exports more, the demand for yen increases, but the country's overall economic size keeps the yen at a lower value. In contrast, the euro is used by a group of countries with varying economic strengths. Germany might have a strong economy, but other countries in the European Union, like Greece or Italy, may not be doing as well. This creates a unique situation where the euro's value is a blend of these different economies. Now, how do we figure out how much one currency is worth compared to another? That's where exchange rates come in. Exchange rates tell you how much of one currency you need to buy another. And guess what? These rates are constantly changing. This is what makes currency trading and foreign exchange markets so complex and fascinating. Think of exchange rates as a balancing act. They fluctuate because of supply and demand, just like stocks. When a country's economy is booming, its currency becomes more valuable because everyone wants a piece of that action. But when a country is facing issues like high inflation, political instability, or poor economic performance, investors tend to stay away, causing the currency to drop. Example, let's say the US is exporting lots of goods to other countries. Foreign buyers need US dollars to pay for those goods. As demand for US dollars increases, so does its value compared to other currencies like the yen or euro. Meanwhile, if Japan is importing more than it exports, there's less demand for the yen, which weakens its value. Central banks also play a huge role. They often step in to stabilize or influence their currency. For example, Japan's central bank might lower interest rates to make the yen cheaper and more attractive for trade, which boosts exports. Two of the most important factors that influence currency values are inflation and interest rates. These economic indicators can make or break a currency's strength. Inflation is the rate at which prices rise in a country. If a country has high inflation, its currency tends to lose value because each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. Think of it like this. If inflation in Japan rises, each yen buys less than it did before, which means people and businesses need more yen to purchase the same products. This weakens the yen's value on the global stage. On the flip side, interest rates are a powerful tool that central banks use to control currency value. When a country has high interest rates, it attracts foreign investors who want to earn higher returns on their investments. These investors need to buy that country's currency to make their investments, which drives up demand and strengthens the currency. The US dollar is a prime example of this. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, the value of the dollar tends to rise because investors flock to the US for better returns. Alright, let's get a little more practical. When we talk about currencies, we also need to talk about how much your money can actually buy. This is called purchasing power parity, PPP. The basic idea behind PPP is that, in theory, $1 should be able to buy the same amount of goods in every country. But, as we know, that's not the case. Why? Because every country has different costs of living, wage levels, and economic policies. Example: a simple cup of coffee in the US might cost $5, but in Japan, that same coffee could cost 300 yen, which is only about $2. That's a huge difference, even though you're getting the same product. This difference is due to local economic factors. Japan might have lower production costs or lower inflation, which allows prices to stay lower than in the US. PPP helps economists figure out whether a currency is overvalued or undervalued based on what it can actually buy in the real world. But it's important to remember that PPP is more of a theoretical concept than something you'll see in action day to day. Here's the million-dollar question. Why don't we just have one global currency? Wouldn't that solve all these exchange rate problems and eliminate the need to worry about fluctuating values? While it sounds appealing in theory, implementing a single global currency faces a host of challenges that go far beyond convenience. Economic sovereignty and flexibility. The first major hurdle is economic sovereignty. Every country has its own unique economy, and one of the critical tools for managing that economy is control over its currency. A unified global currency would strip nations of the ability to adjust critical levers, such as interest rates or money supply, based on their individual needs. For example, let's revisit the 2008 financial crisis in the United States. During that period, the U.S. Federal Reserve lowered interest rates dramatically to stimulate the economy and increase liquidity. By lowering interest rates, borrowing became cheaper, which encouraged spending and investment, helping the U.S. weather the storm. If the U.S. were tied to a global currency, it wouldn't have had the freedom to make such decisions independently. Instead, it would have had to coordinate with other nations, some of which may not have experienced the same level of economic downturn. This could lead to delays in recovery or even worsen the crisis. Similarly, developing economies often rely on adjusting their currency exchange rates to maintain competitiveness in global trade. For instance, if a country's currency is devalued, its goods and services become cheaper for other countries to buy, boosting exports. With a single global currency, this flexibility disappears, making it difficult for struggling economies to respond to global market shifts. Economic disparity between nations. A second significant challenge is the vast economic disparity between nations. Wealthy countries like Germany, Japan, or the United States have highly developed financial systems, strong infrastructure, and a generally stable economic environment. On the other hand, developing nations, such as Ghana or Bangladesh, face a completely different set of economic realities, ranging from lower GDP per capita to more volatile markets. It would be nearly impossible to set a single monetary policy that meets the needs of both a highly industrialized nation and a developing one. Take inflation control, for example. In wealthier nations, the focus may be on controlling inflation to protect savings and maintain consumer purchasing power. However, in developing countries, the primary goal may be stimulating growth through increased spending and borrowing, which could result in higher inflation. A global currency would require a one-size-fits-all approach, making it extremely difficult to create monetary policies that can cater to such diverse economic situations. This disparity would lead to unequal benefits. Wealthier countries might push for policies that protect their assets, while poorer nations would be left vulnerable to economic decisions that don't suit their circumstances. In essence, the needs of a few dominant economies could override the needs of smaller, struggling ones. Political power and influence. Political factors also come into play. The creation of a global currency would raise questions about which international body would control it. Who decides how much currency to print? Who determines interest rates? These decisions are not just economic, they're deeply political. Countries are unlikely to give up the political leverage that comes with controlling their own currency. For example, the US dollar currently holds a unique position as the world's primary reserve currency. This gives the US significant influence over global financial markets. Other nations, especially those with large economies, are unlikely to relinquish their monetary control and hand over decision-making power to a supranational organization. Furthermore, international cooperation on such a massive scale would require a degree of political harmony that currently doesn't exist. Global powers often have conflicting political and economic interests, which would make managing a single currency extremely challenging. One nation's economic downturn could drag down the entire world, causing tension between countries that might otherwise have separate economic cycles. Currency crises and economic shocks. Imagine the ripple effect of a global currency during an economic crisis. When one country experiences a currency collapse today, the damage is often contained within its borders or spreads regionally. For example, the 1997 Asian financial crisis primarily affected Asian markets. However, if all nations were tied to one global currency, a crisis in one country could spread instantaneously across the globe, causing worldwide economic instability. The entire global financial system would be vulnerable to systemic shocks that could be catastrophic on an unprecedented scale. Cultural and historical attachments. On a more nuanced level, currencies often hold significant cultural and historical value for a nation. They are symbols of national identity and pride. Adopting a global currency would mean giving up that piece of national heritage. Imagine countries like the United States no longer using the dollar, or Japan no longer using the yen. It would represent more than just an economic change. It would signify a loss of a cultural touchstone that citizens often associate with their country's history and sovereignty. Many nations would resist this not just for economic reasons, but for symbolic ones. So, why isn't $1 equal to 1 yen or 1 euro? The answer lies in the vast differences between the world's economies, how currencies are traded, and the needs of each country. While the idea of a single global currency sounds appealing, the reality is that every country needs its own monetary system to manage its economy effectively. But who knows? With the rise of digital currencies, we might see a more unified currency system in the future. If you found this video helpful, and if you're interested in understanding how inflation impacts your daily expenses and purchasing power, you'll want to check out this video, where we dive deep into the hidden ways inflation affects your life and how you can protect yourself financially.